Carol.
Call Dr. David Clark.
Mr. Chair.
Part two.
Part two. I'm delighted to speak directly to part two, and in particular the broadening of the definition of revenue, which is so crucial to the actual measurable impacts of this bill. Mr. Chair, I mentioned earlier the excellent work done by officials in servicing the committee, and one of the pieces of work that they did was bringing back to us some figures around, which I've mentioned earlier, around what might be collected from overseas borrowers if obligations were met. The definition of revenue is touched upon in many of the clauses in Part 2. I note in, for example, Clause 51, there is a number of additional definitions inserted, so describing the meaning of an unpaid amount, an amount that must be paid by a borrower in accordance with the written notification under Section 52 is subclause F, subclause G, a late filing penalty, subclause H, a student loan shortfall penalty, subclause I, an underestimation penalty. These are all broadening the definition of revenue, and presumably in response to some tricky situations or some technical issues that have been faced where a borrower has disputed whether indeed the revenue was appropriate to be collected. Now, the officials gave us an estimate of the additional revenue that would be collected through the broadening of the definition of revenue, and that estimate was $1 million a year from 2015-16. Now, we know that putting legislation through this Parliament costs more than that, Mr. Chair, and so we did, as a committee, some of us were quite concerned. We raised as a committee, those of us who were concerned, concerns that we didn't have clear estimates about how much additional revenue would be collected as a result of this bill. And I've raised earlier my concern that some of the other substantive parts of the bill might not be able to be implemented because of challenges with the computer system. So we're left with the definition of revenue being the substantive and substantial amount that can be quantified, and that amount, it has to be said in tax terms and in terms of the times of this House and in terms of the priorities of the government, a $1 million tax grab is actually a little on the small side. The Minister in recent days canned a car park tax that was aimed at gathering 17 million, which is 17 times the amount that we know for sure will be collected by this tax. We've had the paperboy tax, and there's talk of an iPad tax, although that looks like it will be hit on the head as well. We have a government that is trying to, through small measures, broaden the tax base. The general effort to broaden the tax base we of course support, because we believe that everyone should pay their fair share, but it does seem that a lot of these measures could be brought together in one bill rather than being debated over a lengthy period of time, when we know that these are really small measures, and also that the ones that look more substantial are not yet certainties for implementation, and certainly on past record may not be possible. So, Mr. Chair, the broadening of the definition of revenue goes into much detail in this section, and I won't debate all of that, simply to say that a lot of it is around small matters of wording, and we also have some discussion around late payment interest and the ability of the Commissioner to grant relief. And look, we support those kinds of things because, as my colleague David Cunliffe has previously pointed out, the intent to specify every single case where relief may be granted goes a step too far, and indeed in some cases it is appropriate that there is discretion for the Commissioner. So, Mr. Chair, in closing this short contribution, I want to say that Labor supports the bill as a whole. We have already outlined our concerns with the Henry VIII clauses. We are concerned that there really isn't a clear picture about how much revenue this will collect, and it's not even clear to us, and became increasingly in the committee worrisome, that this couldn't already be accurately collected through the Customs Department compulsorily requiring some details to be provided. Thank you.
Chairman.
Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to build on what some of my colleagues have said in relation to Part 2 of this student loan scheme amendment.